we're hoping to, we will be recording for the benefit of those who can't be here, as the nice voice just told you there. And we'll leave some time at the end for a Q&A, and with that Q&A you'll be, and I'll remind you at the end, either able to just put your hand up and ask a question verbally, we'll unmute you, or you can continue to post your questions into the Q&A function. So for our agenda today, we'll refresh, for those of you who already know what the race report is about, we'll refresh your memories a little bit about why we're doing this and why it's important and some of the context around it. And we'll then go into how the process works, everything from how we collect the data to how we want to use it and what the impact, at least the perceived impact, is going to be. Rachel will then walk us through some of the findings from 2022, which we felt was a very successful year for the first year, and has already started to cause some of the impact that we hoped it would cause. And then we'll go into what's coming up ahead for 2023 and how we hope you can all take part and be involved and support the program, as well as supporting the underlying reasons for this, which is all about increasing diversity, increasing inclusion, and giving a bigger voice within the sector for people who are currently underrepresented within that. So once again, thank you for coming. And I'm going to pass over now to Rajneet, who's going to give us a little bit about the context of the race report and why it is important.
Thanks, Manu. So yeah, just the next couple of slides will be like talking about the race report and why it's important. So just a bit of context. So the word race is an acronym for Racial Action for the Climate Emergency, and was created to focus on environmental charities and funders based in the UK. So we launched the race report last year in April 2022 with the aim of increasing transparency amongst charities and funders, working on improving on their diversity and inclusion aspect in their organisation. And this, we believe that the race report will drive the change in the environmental, conservation, nature and climate sector. We also believe that the race report is a catalyst for meaningful action to tackle the barriers that prevent people of colour from working and thriving in our sector. So this slide is about a bit of research on why it's important to bring this in. So this chart is describing the environmental professions that are one of the least diverse professions in the UK. And this was from the Office of National Statistics data. And it shows that environmental professionals are making, based on like diversity data being 4.81% compared to all professions being 12.64%. And from this, we can try harder to represent the communities that we serve and how vital it is to work together. I just also briefly mentioned that another piece of research that fed into the race report was from the 2017 policy exchange, and that highlighted that the environmental sector is one of the least, well, second least diverse sectors, with farming being the first. So this just strengthens and highlights the importance on delivering change to the sector. Next slide. So the aims of the race report. So the first one being to drive the sector on diversity and inclusion to create transparency, working with the sector to create step change, and providing a space for sharing practice. So just building on the aims and creating step change, we need to first look at the barriers and preventions that people of colour are facing, and understand and learn from them and what's stopping them really. And also just to get the sector into a better position from what it is currently right now to represent the racially and ethnically diverse communities that we want to serve and represent. And collectively, we can help deliver on environmental and climate justice. Next slide, please. So this part is the next step of the race report and what it's really all about. I'm going to just talk you through how it works. So first of all, the race report works by organizations collecting and submitting their data to us. So the first part is reviewing the list of data points required for data submission. This can be found on our website under the resource page, and it shows you the list of the data points that we ask from you, all the questions that we want you to fill in really. And then the next stage is collecting your data. So once you've seen the data points, you have an idea of what you need to collect from your organization. And then the last part is just submitting your data via the online data collection form, which is also on our website. I'll just quickly say that the form is designed in a way where it's when you enter all your details, it's a straight submission. You can't really save halfway. So we do ask when you're collecting, make sure you collect everything so you can submit it all in one go. Next slide. Okay, so this is the data collection form itself. So all data from organizations will be collected and submitted through an online form found on the Race Report website. So the form is broken down into 3 categories. Section A, which is the administration and organization characteristics, so like charity name, charity number, things like that. And then section B is the race and ethnicity data for staff and governance bodies, looking at diversity data, race characteristics, age, gender, identity, number of trustees, number of senior staff, permanent and non-permanent staff. And then the last part, which is optional, which is based on like your organization, is looking at information on policy, strategy, and action on diversity and inclusion. This is the section on like best practice, like what is your organization doing in terms of policies, strategies, recruitment to encourage more people of color into your workplace and your organization. So data collection and submission can be found in our new FAQ page on our website, and you can also get in touch with the email below. Thank you. I'll pass on now to my colleague, Rachel.
Thanks, Majani. So yeah, I'm just going to go through a quick summary of what we found in the first year of the race report in 2022. So last year, as Mani said, we were really pleased with the participation we received. So 175 organisations signed up. 94 of those went on to make a submission, with 91 including diversity data in at least one of the categories that's included in the data submission form. However, the final point on this slide just shows the scope for improvement, and we're really hoping to see a greater conversion rate this year between the organisations that sign up and those that actually go on to make a submission. And hopefully those organisations that have indicated their interest last year are now in a position to make that submission. So from those 91 organisations that did submit their diversity data, this slide just shows a summary of the different findings from the different categories of employee or kind of people involved in the organisations. For example, on the bottom right, you can see the figure for governance and trustee boards, so it's not employees in that instance. There was variation in the number of organisations that had data in each of the categories. So you'll see in each of the boxes that we've noted how many organisations the data represents. But kind of looking at the biggest submission, which is the overall staff, and that's 77% of staff overall identified as people of colour or ethnically or racially minoritized backgrounds. That is sit fairly kind of level across the different categories of staff, but there are some variations. For example, people managers were less likely to identify as people of colour, with just 5% of people managers identifying in that way, but more likely to identify that way for non-permanent staff when we're looking at contract extensions or being made permanent. So this just breaks down that overall staff figure in a bit more detail. So this is the most comprehensive data we have from the organisations, with 91 organisations representing 7,948 employees. And we can see that 7% of those identified as people of colour or racially, ethnically minoritized groups. It is also worth noting that a fairly substantial proportion of people did not disclose their race or ethnicity when submitting their data to their organisation. So that is a useful indicator for us as a sector to see how that change and people become more comfortable in identifying themselves through these data collection processes. And we use this kind of more up-to-date figure to compare what people in employment look like compared with people in employment in our data collection exercise. And you can see that compared to the UK population, working age 16 to 64 and in employment during 21-22, 14% of those identified as people of colour and racially, ethnically minoritized groups, but in our data collection, as we've seen, that's just 7%. So they're some of the key findings from last year, and for those of you who haven't seen it, who might be new to the campaign, you can find the full data on our website. So yeah, do have a look at that. I'm now just going to touch on some new developments that we are making for the 2023 data submission. So in general, the process will remain the same, should be fairly familiar to those of you who took part last year. But there's two kind of key changes, mostly in how one to do with how we publish the data, and second is an additional element that can supplements the diversity data. So in terms of publication of the data, something that we're introducing this year is the idea of a transparency card for all our organisations that participate. The precise information that's included on the transparency card will depend on the organisation's size as defined by their total staff headcount. So we've got two categories of transparency card, one for small organisations, and those are being defined as organisations where there are fewer than 30 staff, using headcount rather than full-time equivalent as the definition. And then the standard transparency card will apply to all other organisations, so all of those who have 30 or more members of staff. So these will be individual reports for those organisations that display their data. As we'll see in the next slide, there'll be slightly different categories of data that will be displayed on each. But just to confirm that we will also be producing aggregated reports, which will be exactly the same as the 22 report for all organisations where no organisation is individually pulled out. It combines all the data from all the organisations who submit. But we will also produce an aggregated report for all of those small organisations, and this will become a bit clearer on this next slide when I go into detail about what's in each of those transparency cards. It's worth also just noting that in the data submission form there is an opportunity for you to note any outstanding concerns around the publication of the data, because we're aware that particularly for those with small numbers of employees last year, the protection of individual identities was really important to you in terms of your ongoing participation. So yeah, that's something that we've aimed to protect in this approach. So yeah, just to go into a bit more detail of the different parts of the report that feature in the different publications that we'll produce. So if we take the first row and look specifically at those organisations who have under 30 staff members, their individual transparency card, which is their bespoke kind of report, which will be published, will only contain data on section C. Both actually it should just have section A because all of them have section A. That's the missing piece from the table, but it will have in terms of their individual data submissions, it will have the details of their policies, strategy and action that they're taking to progress equality, diversity and inclusion in their organisations. The data on their diversity statistics will only feature in an aggregated form, both in the main report and in the specific small organisation report. So for those with 30 or more employees, by head count. This is where the transparency cards are a bit more detailed. So for these organisations, it will include data from section B and section C. So it will be the diversity data and their policy, strategy and action. As with small organisations, they will also be included in the full aggregated report, but obviously because they're not a small organisation according to our definition, they won't feature in that small organisation specific report. So another feature relating to transparency cards is kind of being a bit more open about the non-submission of data. So as we mentioned earlier, we're really hoping that a greater proportion of those that organisations that have signed up and have been invited to participate in the race report go ahead to make a data submission. So we will be publishing the names of eligible organisations that did not submit their data if they fall into the category of being a major or super major charity according to NCVO. And those definitions are a result of income. So major charities are those with income of 10 million to 100 million, and super major are those with more than 100 million in terms of their annual income. So in terms of the other edition for this year, this is the staff perception survey. So while we recognise that transparency around diversity data is really important, it is only kind of part of the picture. And we want to kind of couple with that with a greater understanding of what the inclusive culture is like in environmental charities and funders. So that's the main purpose of the staff perception survey, to kind of complement that numerical quantitative data. So the plan is for this to run biannually. So the first year will be this year, and then it will run again in 2025. It's an optional participation, but obviously we would hope that you are able to take part, and you can sign up, opt in when you sign up to being part of the race report this year. But it is only open to those people who have signed up to submit their data. So we'll produce an aggregated report with all the data from participating organisations combined, but individual organisations will also receive a bespoke summary report of their data to inform their own practices within their workplace. It'll work a bit like the Business in the Community Race at Work survey, if anyone is familiar with that. So SOS UK will host the survey online, and organisations that have opted in will receive a link, which they can then use to promote the survey to their staff members. The survey will be open from the 12th of June to the 2nd of July this year. So that's the window where staff in your organisations will be able to complete the survey. And just to enable the administration of the survey, we would like all organisations that wish to run the staff perception survey to let us know by the 2nd of June. So the survey will gather perceptions in a range of different aspects, including kind of their perceptions of organisational culture in relation to diversity and inclusion, perceptions around recruitment, training and promotion, and also experiences of harassment and discrimination. And you can see the full set of survey questions that we plan to use on our website in the resources section. So we will be asking staff to identify which organisation they work for, and we'll also ask to identify some personal characteristics so we can understand the difference in the experiences, but we won't be collecting their names or contact details, and that organisational data will not be published in the kind of aggregated report. Only you as an organisation will receive that specific data. So I think that's it in terms of our presentation. I think I'm going to hand back over to Manu, so we can go through some of the questions that have been appearing.
Thank you, Rachel and Rajneet. So yeah, this is time for us to answer some of your questions, and yeah, some very good questions coming through on the through the Q&A. And just so we're all aware, some of these questions are things that we've considered in, in great depth, and some of them are still things that we are trying to figure out to make sure that the ultimate report and the way we publish it and so forth is useful not only to yourselves, but obviously to the sector more widely. And the really pertinent questions, we'll attempt to put those onto our FAQs on the website as well, so that you can always refer back to them if there's still any misgivings or things you need to check. So let's go to the first question that we had, and I think the IES question, which was about data submissions for 2023. Rachel, do you just want to very quickly just give those date points again for everybody, just so that for those people who weren't there?
I think actually this is a big oversight from us that we haven't actually put in any of the slides the actual date that the submission, the main diversity data submission, needs to be made for. That's the 2nd of October. So yeah, apologies for that massive oversight. But yeah, that's all available on our website. If, like Rajneet said, we've got a new FAQ section. So hopefully if you have questions about any of the process, definitely head to that as a first port of call. But as always, we're always open to support you further if you still have questions after that. But yes, 2nd of October is the kind of main deadline for the diversity data submissions. And then if I just scroll back, you'll be able to see the staff perception survey. So 2nd of June to let us know whether you want to participate in that or not. And then the window for staff to complete it is the 12th of June to 2nd of July.
Great, thank you, Rachel. And please do just keep coming back to us with questions. We're going to have more of these webinars and Q&A sessions as we go through the summer and into the autumn. So any outstanding questions can always be answered at those, and you also obviously have our emails for us to do that. And then there was a question from Sai at RSPB, which was about why organizations signed up but then didn't submit. I'll kind of kick it off, because there are multiple reasons, and some of them very specific to organizations, some of them more to do with timelines and the rest. I think one of the reasons that I noted from last year was organizations then not having enough time by the time you got towards the end. And so doing this now really gives you guys, a runway of 6 months before we have final submission. And it can be a very heavy process doing it, especially if you're a large organization and you haven't done this before. Or it can be a very easy process if it's given enough time. So I would encourage people to get going with laying the ground for this if it's not something that's natural to your organization, and then that just gives you a lot more time towards the end to get going. So that's reason one. Rajneet and Rachel, is there anything that you would like to add from what you saw operationally last year?
I think I'll just say that with our deadline last year, which was around September, we did get a lot of emails saying that people are on annual leave or people are coming back from annual leave, so it was hard to get organizations to submit their data on time. So that was one of the big ones, I would say, for that one.
Yeah, I would agree. I think the reasons that you've given are the main reasons that people gave for the being not able to make a data submission. And
I would also say we know that internal politics at organizations can mean that you personally might be very on board with why we're doing the race report and feel that it's going to be a useful tool. but you might also have other people in your team who have different ideas about why they should or shouldn't submit. And we would like to be there, I think, as a support for anybody who's wanting to make the argument clear within their own organization, because that can sometimes be the stumbling block. You want to do it, you feel it's necessary, and then it comes to convincing senior management or your team, and there's a bit of resistance there. And I think we've built up enough of a case for the impact or potential impact of the race report for us to be able to support you in answering some of the trickier questions that can come up, because we know there was a minority of organizations in which loads of enthusiasm with the people we spoke with, and then 2-3 weeks down the line, the answer was, we can't submit this year. So please call on us for any support you might need with that. And just so that everybody's aware, so Sophie asked a question about being a global charity, but with less than 30 staff in the UK, despite the global team being larger than that. We are sticking to measuring the numbers for the UK-based staff, as we did last year. There's obviously an argument for and conversations around charities that are based in the UK or registered in the UK that do have large staff teams globally. And I think there'll be an ongoing conversation. The data has to make sense. At the present moment, the impact that we hope to be able to make is with UK operations. But that's not to exclude the fact that a lot of charities, especially the bigger ones, have global teams, or their work is actually happening for the most part in other parts of the world. So we'll keep that conversation open, and hopefully with input and suggestions from the sector, we can make the case for kind of dragging that net a bit wider. I'll go through the questions in sequence. I know some of them are probably more relevant to everybody than others, but we'll go through them in sequence. So the next question was on headcount staff members, whether that includes non-permanent staff. Rachel, do you want to take that one?
Yeah, sure. So yeah, last year we included non-permanent staff as in the overall staff figures. So yeah, we would adopt that same approach again this year. So it is kind of permanent staff and non-permanent staff that make up your total staff count.
Great, and there's a lot of information to be gleaned as well from who is non-permanent and who is receiving permanent contracts as well. Yeah, but as a coverall number, we'll be taking the total all staff at an organization. And I'll take the one from Butterfly Conservation, which is around there being very few individuals who are from minoritized backgrounds. Yeah, the concern is very real around people being identified and so forth. I think it's kind of part and parcel of the race report, to be fairly honest, especially on holding organizations to account, I guess, about what they're doing, but also highlighting some of the barriers. And we are very keen to make the process, as Rachel outlined earlier, one that doesn't identify individual people within organizations. And we want to be able to protect their data, protect their work, allow them to get on with the good work that they are doing. I think ultimately, as the data comes in, if it does feel like this is the case across the board, or in more cases than not, then the way in which we present that data for the transparency cards will have to alter in order to protect those individuals. Is there anything, Rachel or Rajneet, that you'd like to add to that?
Yeah, I was just going to add that one of the plans that if you look on I've actually just seen another comment that for some reason the PDF isn't available for the transparency card, so I'm not sure what's happened to it, but we'll address that after this webinar. But on the example, what we've kind of suggested that might be an approach is grouping percentages as a together where there is really low numbers. So we won't publish kind of the overall number of staff, it will just be purely percentage based. So you won't be able to identify kind of particular individuals, and where there is still a risk of that, for example, if it's showing as 1% of a particular ethnicity, then where it's really low percentages, we might use a range. So it would just be reported as between 1% and 3%, or between 1% and 2%, so that those specific individuals are protected within that kind of percentage range. I think where possible, we would try and present as the data in as much detail as possible, recognizing that different backgrounds have different experiences, and we don't want to kind of imply that kind of too much, as far as we possibly can, that there's a kind of a uniform experience for ethnicities, underrepresented ethnicities. But yeah, like you say, where we need to protect individual identities, we may have to consider kind of some grouping of different categories.
Right, thank you. And we've got a question from Julie from the Environmental Funders Network. And just to clarify, I think what the question is asking us is, are we going to disaggregate, or at least, I guess more simply, separate the data for different geographical areas? And at the present moment, it is looking at the organization and its staff members within the UK. I think there's a lot that can be gleaned from us starting to separate out that data. We've definitely had organizations that took part last year that are based in places that have much lower background diversity anyway, and we understand that they can't conceivably be hiring at the same levels as other organizations that probably have a more urban setting because of the spread of demographics across the UK, and in rural areas as opposed to urban areas, in the north of England as opposed to the south of England, in Scotland as opposed to say the southeast of England, and places like that. It would be amazing if our data did go down to that granular level for analysis purposes, and for us to be able to create much more meaningful packages for what kind of support is needed in different geographical places. At the present moment, it is looking at the UK more widely. I'm sure there might be other ways of aggregating it in different ways for rural and urban and so forth, once we start getting into the analysis. I hope that answers your question, Julie, and please feel free to chase us up if you need any more clarification beyond that. And I'll go through the next question. Nice to meet you, Kate. I think that was the next question. And it's okay to anonymize yourself at this point. So, will the staff perception survey be possible to combine with the data? As in, Kim, I imagine you're asking whether or not you can do both things at the same time. I think that's more to do with your internal processes for how you approach the data collection. Is that correct, or are we asking a more technical question? What do you think, Rajneet and Rachel?
I think so. Basically, it's independent data collection exercises. So because obviously we want to accumulate data from across the sector, I think to facilitate that, we are managing the data collection for the staff perception survey. Just so everything happens at the same time and is asked in the same format, and all those kind of practicalities of doing such a large scale, hopefully, piece of research. So that is like a separate exercise to the diversity data collection, which is something that you manage in-house. There's a kind of a lot more variation of how different organizations might collect that data. For example, you might have a staff survey but you also might collect it through recruitment information. So for example, at SOS UK, we gather that data at the point of recruitment, rather than doing an annual staff survey to collect that data. So we need to kind of bear in mind the differences in data collection around different organizations. But what will be possible is to still do some kind of comparison, because we are going to be using the same metrics for diversity in the staff perception survey, so we can understand the different backgrounds of the people who are answering, and therefore how their experiences differ.
Right.
So yeah, hopefully that makes sense.
Right. Thank you, Rachel. I think it's definitely something we should put onto our FAQs, because I imagine that will be coming back a lot. Another question from Nina here about intersectionality, whether or not the race report will kind of, spread to other diversity issues and identity types. And, a big part of this is having a control so that we can compare and contrast where the environmental sector is making progress, has made progress, where there might still be issues of inclusion based on other forms of identity. Part of your question, which says, how much of this wider data did organizations submit? I think I will defer that to Rajni. Do you want to speak to that?
I think in terms of the wider data did organizations submit, I think a majority was all completed. If some organizations couldn't fill everything in, it was due to own specific reasons. But I think for now, what Manny was saying about the control, I think that's where we're more focused on still.
Yeah. So yeah, we'll use the other, we're really, really aware that there are many different variants of people within a particular group, and that economics, gender, sexuality, and all of those things feed in to the bigger story of why people are excluded or included within the sector. And we did get a lot of that other data as well, because of the way in which we collected it. But how we use it is really what's going to be important in the year ahead. And we want this report to acknowledge that there are intersectional issues going ahead. So yeah, I think it's more of a watch this space as the data comes into us, how useful it can be as we go ahead, and how impactful it can be for raising the issues of those other diversity issues alongside race. So will guidance be provided after data collection, and will this be informed by aggregate data or by individual data of participating organizations and companies? And that's from Natalie at EAUC. I'm not entirely clear, Natalie, maybe it's just me, on what you mean by guidance.
There's a clarification underneath from Natalie, and the questions and the guidance is on how to form action plans.
Okay, great. Yeah, so we've kind of structured this whole process to not just be the transparency aspect. We want this to be a holistic process in which we are helping organizations as well as being able to publish their data. What that level of support looks like, how involved SOS can be in those processes, is still really up for grabs. We are developing both training and looking at things like support networks that will go alongside the race report as we move along. So we'll be publishing those and making sure that everybody who has submitted data is the first to know about what that wider support structure and other ways of creating action plans, if that's what's appropriate to your organization, looks like as we go ahead. I hope that answers your question for now, Nat, but Natalie, sorry, but all of that will come out in the website and in our communications with you over the coming months. How do we access survey findings for our organization? Does somebody want to take that on?
Sure. So I presume you mean this staff perception survey. We will be providing you with a report of the findings. So you need to let us know that you want to take part, and by doing that, also commit to promoting it to your staff members, and then we will, in the analysis of the survey, produce a separate summary report for your organisation, which we will send to the contacts who are registered in our systems for your organisation.
Great. And do you want to take the next one down from that, from Nina, Rachel?
Sure, yeah. So the survey questions are all available in our resources section on the website. I can't actually get to it right now because I'm sharing my screen, but we'll post the link on in the chat or to this response, so you can access it directly.
You know, and we do want this to be a conversation. So not this, I mean, this is a conversation, but, you know, more widely. So please feedback to us what's possible, what's not possible, what you think is going to be too difficult to achieve. And, you know, we want to be informed by what's actually going to work on the ground and what's going to be useful to the sector and to your specific organizations. So if something just feels like, oh, that's going to be far too difficult, we don't have the resources, the time, or there's not going to be enough buy-in from our staff or from our management, then please feed that back to us so we can figure out ways of making it work. And Dr. Rob Hawkins from ICF, we will be asking you to measure the diversity data for your particular organization. There are many membership organizations that that we have interacted with, but yeah, you're completely right. Though it would be double accounting if any of your member organizations also then submitted their data, it wouldn't work. So Claire Somerville, I noted in FAQ, we plan to partner with a media organization, publish headline racial data statistics for the top 15 sector organizations by turnover. Does this mean you identify the biggest 15 organizations and rank them via data, or that you find top 15 organizations by your data analysis and rank them via turnover? It is more the first. Essentially, we've now got a pretty clear list of the top 60 something organizations by turnover that whose main priority is environmental work. And as Rachel mentioned earlier, we will be asking those organizations very directly to take part within the report. If they do not take part, we will be highlighting that they did not participate. And so when we publish the data, it will be very, very clear that although their turnover is above a certain point, actually it's their income, which is slightly different from turnover, I guess, is above a certain point, they chose not to participate, rather than from the organizations that we've received data from. And this is the same. So, you know, for those of you who might not know that, you know, a big part of the idea for this came from work that I was doing with Green 2.0 in America and looking at the impact that report had. And one of the key cornerstones of that program in the US is that they are not targeting, but they are highlighting the biggest organizations within the US working on environmental issues. When you start to look at staff numbers of who those top 10, 15, 20 organizations in the UK are, you know, some of them are employing thousands and thousands of people. So if real change is gonna start to happen on diversity, it has to be led by the biggest organizations, because changes to how they're doing their staffing, how inclusive they are as environments, the sort of actions that they're taking and how they can share them with the wider sector, that's going to have a massive impact on most other environmental organizations, which we know from our data are actually very small organizations, not working with massive budgets, and who want to do the right work on this issue, but don't often have the staff, the expertise, and the resources to move on this stuff. So we feel it's really, really important that the much bigger organizations with much bigger resources, much more power, are seen to be doing the right thing and publishing how they're doing it so that it can be shared with everybody else. I hope that that answers your question, Claire. So we've come to the end of the questions that were posted in the Q&A bit. We've got a little bit of time. Is there anybody who? Oh, there's one more from Nina Seal. Rachel, do you want to read that out? And maybe I think it's directed at you.
Yeah, sorry, we were just discussing via the Q&A. So this is something that is perhaps worth noting, particularly for those people that are new to collecting data from their staff. So we have produced a staff survey template, which mirrors the data submission questions, but also includes wider characteristics beyond the two controls that we're using, age and gender, and race and ethnicity, because it's designed to support your kind of broader equality and diversity work. So this is something that we're considering for future years, kind of the extent to which, as Manny said, we kind of include those broader characteristics. For example, a metric that looks at socioeconomic background and educational experience into the main data submission as well.
Great, thank you, Rachel. You know, and I'll just add on to that, that, you know, in an ideal world, our team would be much bigger and would have, you know, an in-house statistician for a certain period of time and would be working proactively with academics who can analyze the data from all sorts of angles and have a really, you know, forgive the pun, but have a really diverse pool of perspectives and talents of looking at the data. So, and unfortunately, the more data we have, the more analysis that data needs. And so we're looking at the stuff we feel is core for now that we can analyze meaningfully, and that is also then useful for all of you to use internally within your organizations. So if we're out of questions, which you can always send to us, I'll repeat, by email or by getting in touch. I would like to finish off by thanking all of you for coming to our launch, coming to the webinar. Rachel has just posted some key dates within the chat, and please head to our website to sign up. That's www.race-report.org. Encourage others to take part and share within your networks, get buy-in from leadership and trustees, which is always important. It's really where the power rests, and it's where we're going to get the most traction if we're going to make this work, and for it to be a sustainable project that continues to have the impact that it's already showing. And our email is at the bottom there in the slide. Do get in touch. No questions are too simple or too silly for us to have to consider. And remember, we'd love this to be a conversational space in which you are feeding back to us and we are improving our processes to make this more meaningful. So with that, thank you very much. We wish you all a happy break if you're getting a break, and a good bank holiday, and a happy Easter and Grand Iftar for those of you celebrating.